Okay, so here we go again and welcome back. And this week I am jumping straight back into fixing everything that is wrong with my cheap Suzuki Bandit back there. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll already be familiar with my Bandit I've got there. But if you're a new viewer, let me fill you in on why I call it my cheap Suzuki Bandit. And the reason I call this my cheap Suzuki Bandit is, well, it was super cheap. Now, unlike most bikes, I did not buy this with cash. I actually traded an incredibly cheap, nasty Chinese 125 motorbike for this entire Suzuki Bandit. And the bike that in question that I traded for this was worth about 130 quid, or that's what it owed me anyway. So to start this project, the bike basically cost me 130 quid, which is dirt cheap for a Suzuki Bandit, especially a low mileage one like that. And if you're wondering why anybody would swap that for a 125, especially for a 125 that was as rough as the one I traded them for this, then you should probably watch the previous videos where you find out that this bike has not only got a bit of a shady history, but it's got a whole host of problems that's currently stopping it getting through an MOT. If you watched the last video that I did with this bike, then you'll already know that I fixed a bunch of electrical gremlins with a headlight. I actually ended up replacing the entire headlight unit and fiddling with the wiring. But now it has got some much more severe issues that we need to tackle today. First of which is up front. Obviously, these forks, they've got absolutely no oil in them. The seals are knackered, and they have in fact thrown all the oil over the front brakes. So the disc is slick and the oil is soaked into the pads. So we need to take all of this off, clean the disc, change the pads, and do something about these forks. But in order to tackle any of those problems, I need to get the forks and the front wheel off. And before I can do any of that, I need to get the bike in the air and secured, which is where my new little motorcycle lift comes into play. Okay, so the bike is on the center stand for stability. So the center stand is still touching the ground, so it is not going anywhere. And then I've propped my little motorbike lift under there, wound it up a bit to get that front wheel off the floor. So I'm going to drop the front wheel, undo the brake calipers, and then drop the forks out. And hopefully it all works nice and smooth, just as I said. So front wheel is off. I didn't get much of that on film because I kept getting phone calls while I was trying to film, but the wheel is on the floor there. It was actually quite awkward. There was two nuts that you need to undo on the front here and then take the center pin, or the, I don't even know what you call it. It's like a big long bolt. That slides out. You need to support the front wheel and obviously make sure you keep hold of the spacers and put them back the right way around. But that is all now free. So I got two bolts on each side of this to undo. And then we're going to drop the forks. Okay, new problem. So in true fashion with this bike, one of the bolts was not a bolt, it was an actual screw that somebody put in and it rounded. So I had to drill it out and it's now stuck in the retaining plate that goes inside the fairing. So I'm now going to have to work out how in the hell I get that out of there. Fun. But nevertheless, we crack on anyway because we can deal with that problem later on. So, fairing off, let's drop these forks. So dropping the forks now should be fairly straightforward. It is just 4 bolts down there to loosen off the bottom yoke, Allen bolts on the side here, and then the caps. So let it crack on with those. Okay, bit of a fast forward here. I've actually had to undo the bolts for the handlebars so that I can drop the cap. I had to put the shock or the fork back in so that I could undo the cap, which is a lesson I've now learned. That comes off first. So I'm going to drop this fork back out. I'll put the new fork in and then I will repeat the process for the other side. Okay, we're going to hit pause there for a second because as you probably saw in the last couple of clips there, I made some pretty silly mistakes. For starters, I put the fork down with the cap off and it leaked fluid all over the floor. So I got a nice big oily patch on my floor. Also, obviously I dropped the handlebars in order to take the cap off the forks when I really did not need to do that. Now originally I was going to fix the old forks and just top up the oil, put new seals in, do the whole shebang on it. But I kind of talked myself out to doing it when I realised I could get a replacement set of forks that are in good working order from Becky Bandit, who sells loads and loads of Bandit parts on Facebook Marketplace. So thank you, Becky, for sorting me out. And I actually got a set of forks for 40 quid, which was 15 quid more than the cost of oil and seals. So it just made sense to buy those forks and put them on instead. Now, there was a bit of confusion once I got that fork on because that top is totally different to that cap. So I thought I needed to change those caps over, but actually what is in these forks is like a regulator or damper or adjuster of some sort so that you can actually increase the pressure in the fork so that you can kind of tune it to suit your kind of performance or how much dampening you want. So basically I ended up messing with a bunch of things that I didn't need to do for no reason and lost a bunch of time because all I needed to do was drop the fork out and put the new forks in. So I guess you live and you learn, but obviously I've made a big mess and done some things that I now need to redo and I've lost some time, but we crack on. A lot of you will probably already know how to do this, but it is a tip that I learned recently, and that is if you are using an Allen key and the bolt or the nut is really stiff and you can't move it by hand, you can adjust an adjustable, slot that in to give yourself some leverage, and then makes the job a lot easier to do. And just like that, the fork slides out. So as you can see with this fork, there is like nothing left in that. And with the new one, that's a lot better. So let's go ahead and get that in place, and then we'll make sure we've lined them up and they're all at the same height. So with the forks in place and adjusted to the same height, it's now time to put these bolts back in the bottom yoke to secure the forks and make sure they don't move or slide at all. Okay, forks now done. That is one big job out of the way. That's not the only job I gotta do. I've still gotta do these front brake pads and clean the disc. I've got that brake light switch to do just there, and of course I've got to take the rear wheel off so that I can get that change that tire over, and I've got that bottom suspension bush to do. I've got the actual the entire arm with the new bush in it, so I'm just going to change the whole piece rather than taking it out and get a bush or bearing pressed into it. But before I can do any of that, I need to get this front wheel on and get those pads changed. Okay, so front wheel is actually on. I have turned the forks the right way round, because if you noticed in the last clip I did have them on the wrong way round, but they actually go on this way round. In terms of getting the pads out, on the bottom of these there is a slide pin. I've already taken the little release pin out of that one. I have sprayed a bunch of rust penetrant on this because that pin does not really want to come out very easily. You have to kind of grip it with the pliers and turn it. There is supposed to be a little nut on the end, but that looks rounded. So you do literally just have to pull that pin out because it doesn't actually screw in. So I need to get that out so I can slide them pads up and get them out. So this is going to be a bit of a mission for me. Okay, so the first slide pin is out. That one came out pretty easily. That was from the one that was all contaminated with the oil from the forks. So it's not really rusted and corroded because it was all caked in oil. So I've actually taken the pads out, cleaned all the caliper down. So I have a lot of like brake cleaner and some, I can't think what they're called now, some wipes with degreaser wipes. So that should be good for the new pads to go in. I just need to wind back them calipers. But before I do that, I've got to take the top off the brake reservoir. And then obviously I've got to do the other caliper. Okay, thinking on my feet here a bit because that one is now done. That is nice and clean. The new pads are in, as you can see there. That one's done. That was fairly easy. But the next one, I am really struggling to get that slide pin out. I mean, as you can see, it's all chewed up. I've soaked it in penetrant. I cannot get it to move. So I've seen online that you can heat it up. I don't have a blowtorch to heat it up. So I'm going to test out my steam cleaner. Maybe I can heat it up enough with that to just break the seal between the rust. I really don't know. At the very least, it'll get a bit of a clean. But I'm hoping this will warm it up enough just to get it free so I can pull that pin out. Okay, back on, all clean, new pads, clean disc. That ended up being a mammoth of a task. That last slide pin, I actually ended up pouring boiling hot water on it, tapping it with a hammer, and then forcing it out with the mole grips. So really not particularly brilliant, but it is now back in. The slide pin, the pin is in to keep it in, so all good. Okay, front forks and brakes all done. So now I need to do the brake light switch, which is under here. So I'm going to have to take all of this back off, take the switch off, and replace that with a new one. So let's get straight into that. So unplug the brake light switch, and then the switch is just here. Now it's probably the mechanism that was stopping it working efficiently, but just for good measure, we'll take the whole thing off and replace it with a nice new one. Okay, that's back on. It's not flickering anymore, and foot on the lever. That is now working. Another job done. So with the big jobs, or a lot of the big jobs out of the way now, there is just the mammoth task for me now of getting that rear wheel off, changing over the sprocket and the brake disc onto the new wheel that I've already bought. And then obviously I've got to do the suspension arm under there. So I'm just going to cut to a time lapse and I'm just going to get it all done. And hopefully we'll see once it's all done, because I have got to get this thing in for MOT tomorrow and I am running out of time. So let's get straight into it. Rear wheel is all prepped. I mean, very good tread on that. Brake disc is on, it's all tightened up, torqued up, everything I need. That's ready to go on. So just need to do this bottom arm under here. Now that the wheel is off, I can give you a good look at it. It is that right there that I'll be changing. And I got a new one right here. So the plan is drop these arms off this one, unbolt the 3 nuts on that's holding that one on the bike, and put this one in its place. Now that seems simple enough, but we'll probably run into some problems along the way. They seem like they're 17mm nuts and bolts, so gonna whip those off, get the new one on. Okay, so the new arm is in and it's got all new bearings in, so that is all done. Now I didn't get most of that on film as per, but that turned into an absolute mission because each bolt is held in at different points, so you have to kind of take the weight off the bike in different places and things to actually get the bolts free and make sure there's no pressure on them so you don't bend anything, which meant, you know, like jacking the bike up from different points and supporting the arm and things like that. So that just turned into an absolute minefield, and I just wanted to get the job done because I am running out of time. Well, that's done. Rear wheel is going to go back on now. I'm going to adjust the chain to make sure there's no play in it, and then it's going to go back for a retest. So fingers crossed we're nearly there. Well, once again, there's a problem. Problem is solved now, but let me talk you through what's happened. So the new rim, which I've now not got the tyre on, is different to the one that I took off. Even though the tyre was the exact same size, the rim is slightly different. So after like nearly an hour of work trying to work out why the hell we couldn't get the wheel on, we realised the rim is different. So I've taken it to a garage, had the tyre swapped over, and now I'm going to throw it back on, put everything back in, grease the bolts up, yada yada yada. So let's get to do that. So that all just flew back on. That was nice and easy. It's all greased up, everything's tightened up. The chain has actually been adjusted to take the play out of it. So fingers crossed it goes through the MOT now with a totally clean advisory. But before, total clean bill of health. But before I can do that, there's one thing left to do. Obviously, when I took the front fender off, there was a bolt that I had to drill out. I, again, from Becky Bandit, got these for 10 quid. They just retain the fender onto the front fork, so I'm just going to throw that back on. And with that, the bike is now finally ready to go back for its MOT, which I will be picking it up and taking it there in the morning. So it's actually going to happen tomorrow, but for you, it's going to be in about 3, 2, 1. And just like that, it is now the next day and the bike is back from its MOT. And in my hand, I hold a piece of paper that says I have somewhat of a smidgen of a clue of what I'm doing, or at the very least, I've learned a few things. But the bike has passed the MOT with almost a clean bill of health. Obviously, I did not change the chain, so it does still have an advisory for some wear in the chain, but the rest of the bike is now mechanically sound and the bike is roadworthy. Because the bike is now roadworthy, that is a massive step closer to this project being done. Getting it through an MOT and getting roadworthy is a huge step forward. It's taken me a fair bit of work and a lot of firsts on this bike. You know, before actually what I've done on this, I'd never changed the rear wheel or never taken one off, never even taken a front one off, changed a set of forks, brake pads. A lot of what I've done on this has been the first time I've ever done it. And obviously a lot of the rear end, I had massive help from my dad. So thank you very much, Dad, for coming to help me, because I really would have struggled to do all that on my own. But the bike is done and through an MOT. So we're still at a point where, despite all the work that I've actually done and the hours I've sunk into this bike, it still looks pretty much the same as the day that I picked it up, with the exception of the opposite side heel plate. Which does mean in the next video, I'll have to do something about the cosmetics of it. How much I'm gonna do, I don't know. At the very least, it'll be getting a damn good clean. And I have got something planned for that rear cowling. And then once it's all clean and looking tidy, it will be up for sale, which should be in the next week or so. Obviously, at the end of the last video on the Bandit, I was up to about £300, and I have fitted a lot of new parts or brand new second-hand parts since then. So I think the build is up to a fraction over £400, but I have sold the old headlight, and obviously the rim that I've got from this bike, I'll be putting up for sale as well, because obviously it didn't fit. It's no good to me once the bike, well, it's no good to me anyway, because it doesn't go on this bike, but that'll be going up for sale. So when I get to the end of the next video, I will do all of the costings of what the actual project has cost, because I know a lot of people like to know that, and then we can see how much profit I've actually made on it once the bike is sold. So that is just about it for this video, because other than cleaning and cosmetics, there is not very much left to do, and obviously to get it sold. So if you've enjoyed this video, then make sure you hit that thumbs up button. And if you're interested in seeing what else I've got coming, then make sure you hit that subscribe button, because it really does help the channel along. So until next week's video, thank you very much for watching.